Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you everyone for joining the HFS webinar today, where we'll be talking about uh, harnessing the power of the AAA trifecta, which we which where we look at the combination of automation, analytics, and artificial intelligence. What are some of the challenges that enterprises are facing, and how are they looking at overcoming those, especially in this pandemic shock that we are in today? How do we sort of get ahead of the COVID-19 shock that the world economy is facing, and how do we actually realize the power of the AAA trifecta of automation, analytics, and artificial intelligence? So today I'm joined by, my name is Saurabh Gupta, I'm the Chief Research Officer at HFS, but I'm joined by two wonderful gentlemen, both distinguished, one as an enterprise buyer at Citibank and one as the CEO of a interesting, in fact, a HFS hot vendor, data management solutions company called Xceptor. Ben, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, Saurabh. And firstly, thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's a great honor, so I appreciate it. So yes, my name is Ben Rayner. I work at Citigroup in capital markets, O&T. And as my title says, I'm the head of an innovation and productivity group, which actually is very closely aligned, albeit not originally intentionally, with some of the HFS philosophies. Hence why it's a great fit. So I'm looking forward to the session today. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. And Andrew?
Yeah, and similarly, very grateful for the invite to be involved in this webinar. I'm Andrew Cullenbreeze. I'm the CEO of Xceptor. Xceptor is a leading no-code enterprise-grade automation platform. Look forward to talking about what we do, who we do it for, and particularly the relationship we have with Citigroup, which I'm sure will draw lots of useful information through the webinar.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben and Andrew. And we'll listen more from them. But just in terms of quick housekeeping, we want to make this interactive. So there is a Q&A button on your Zoom app. Please use it. Please submit your questions. We will definitely reserve some time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. And as we go through, if there are some interesting questions, I'll definitely pick them up. All you have to do is just click on that Q&A icon and submit a question, and Ben, Andrew, and I can see those questions, and we can pick them up and answer those. So let's begin. I saw this on social media, and despite the profanity of this quote, I think it's pretty profound. I think we keep talking about data lakes, but actually most enterprises today live in data swarms. And I think we will talk a lot about data in today's conversation because, the power of AI, automation, analytics, the promised land is there, but very few have been able to get to that promised land. And one of the biggest challenges is data. How do you unleash your data? Is one of the biggest challenges. It's not just about a lot of data, but it's also about the quality of the data and the usefulness of data. So we'll come back to this as we go through the webinar today. But one of the things that's pretty evident over the last 5 years or so is that all these emerging technologies have definitely captured the C-suite attention. Whether it's cloud, IoT, artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, blockchain, nearly every global 2000 organization, as you can see here, is investing in it, right? 9 out of 10 organizations are doing something with it, either a pilot or a prototype or something. Nobody's denying the power. Nobody's denying the value that these technologies bring to the way that we will do business, the way that we will consume services, and the way that we will deliver services and goods going forward. In fact, I think the silver lining to the sad situation that we are in today is that it might actually create a burning platform for digital transformation. I think Bill Gates recently made the famous quote that what we saw in the last 10 years, we are seeing in the last 1 month in terms of digital transformation. And I think we just last month did a pretty major study where we tried to get a sense or a pulse check of the industry, where we reached out to more than 600 of our clients across the global 2000, across the globe. And as you can see here, there is a sense of urgency. The intent of digital transformation has to convert into reality, and there is no better burning platform than what we are experiencing today. And as you can see, uh, cyber security, automation, AI analytics, essentially the AAA trifecta, as we call it, as well as cloud, is going to see a significant increase in spending, largely because I think there is no time to wait for transformation. There's no time to wait for digital. I think it's time to go straight to digital. And I think that's where we will see COVID-19 becoming a sort of a burning platform for digital transformation. At the same time, there is no denying that we are headed into a recessionary economy. How deep that recession goes is really the big question, is probably the $5 trillion question right now. But we are headed to a recessionary economy. And I think we'll have to figure out ways of achieving these uh, at the lowest possible cost. So it's the time to do a lot more with a lot less. So it's an interesting combination or a dichotomy of changes that we'll have to deal with. But having said that, we've looked at every enterprise is trying to do something with these emerging technologies. We've looked at the fact that we now have a burning platform in terms of COVID-19, but very few have been able to achieve it. Very few have been able to get to the promised land. As you can see on this page, even if you look at cloud, which has been more than a decade old conversation, only 30% of the global 2000 enterprises have a scaled up cloud initiative. Less than 20% have actually scaled up in any meaningful way their automation, AI, or analytics initiatives. Uh, People are trying these technologies in nooks and corners of their organization, um, or it could be by geography, it could be by function, but very few enterprises that we've spoken to have an enterprise-wide approach to using emerging technologies. And I think that's the challenge as we look at the next year and the next 10 years, is how do we scale this thing up, right? How do we get to the promised land? And I think one of the fundamental issues within that is data. As you can see on this slide, we reached out to about 260 odd, global 2000 enterprise leaders, and their biggest, these are the top 5 challenges that these leaders expressed in terms of managing data. And you see here, right, unstructured data doesn't even make it to the top 5. We've got bigger problems to solve, or more fundamental issues to solve, like data quality. You can have the best AI algorithm, you can invest as much in getting the most sophisticated algorithms, but if the underlying data is crap, there's nothing much that you can do with it, right? And the data quality and the data silos that exist in global 2000 organizations today across industries is something that we'll have to solve for and put our priorities, business priorities, into, to really achieve the lack of scale, the lack of meaningful digital transformation that we've seen. There's no blame on the technologies here. It's not to blame AI or RPA or what have you, but it's about uh, changing the basis, changing the data. How do you invest in data that will really result in getting us to the promised land? It's also important to look at the power of and versus the power of or. I think unfortunately we get into a comparative race of this versus the other, starting from man versus machine to RPA versus RDA to AI versus ML, etc., etc. However, we've got to realize the fact that real business transformation can only achieve if you start to integrate these technologies. And that's where we came up with the AAA trifecta, which you see in the middle is the automation, analytics, and AI, combination of those. And the center of that is where you start to find real meaningful, use cases. But I think even that is not sufficient. I think technology has so overpowered the narrative today that we've forgotten about the people and process. And I think fundamentally we've got to go back to that people, process, technology sort of a framework, but add in data to that conversation if we want to really achieve the transformation that we want to achieve. Otherwise we'll keep running this rat race of faster and cheaper. And faster and cheaper is not transformation. So to summarize, and I'd love to hear what Ben and Andrew think of this. I think if you look at the last 10 years, the why and the what are pretty clear. Most enterprises know why they need to change. It's about digital disruption. It's about data explosion. It's about consumer experience. I think the what is also pretty clear. What has to do something with emerging technologies. There's no denying it. We can keep debating what's the definition of AI, but there is no debate that AI will have an impact on how we do business. I think where we are struggling as an industry is how do you get to that promised land? How do you get to those initiatives? And I think it's not about the technology alone, but it's about these 4 dimensions of strategy, of data, of talent, and of execution. And I won't read through all of this, but we need to figure out a strategy that is not piecemeal, that's enterprise wide. We need to start thinking of the ethics, especially as we start to look at AI and the explainability of it. Data, I've talked about it already, but I can't talk enough about it. We've got to figure out how do you get to quality data? How do you sort of invest in data maturity? Because otherwise we'll never be able to realize the promise of the AAA trifecta. The talent question still is unresolved. It's not just what do we do with our existing talent, but also where do we access the new talent that is required? And it's a very hard question, and most enterprises haven't solved it. And then execution, implementation. There is no playbook, there is no template to success right now. It's not as easy as do these 5 things and you'll achieve success, or 10 things. I think this is a very creative problem solving space that we are in today. And I think one of the things that people have to realize is that culture and mindset are very, very important in execution. Just being cognizant of the fact that you have to have a cultural change is going to be very, very important. But let me pause here and ask perhaps Andrew, if you'd want to, what do you think am I missing in terms of the challenges? Do you think there's anything that you'd want to add?
Yeah, thanks, Saurabh. Perhaps I'd just maybe just answer a question before that, and maybe just sort of amplify on a couple of points from my perspective, because I mean, the challenges that you've mentioned do resonate, particularly around the data. And it's interesting, I saw a sort of a previous survey that we got involved with, which actually talked around 60% of data coming into an organization requires some degree of intervention, whether that's, and that supports the ton of shit data comment. Because it's coming in, it's untrusted. It needs repair, it needs completing as well. And interestingly, we're seeing quite a large percentage of data coming in that actually we have to either calculate or derive because it's not captured at source. And that's quite key. And an example of that is some of the work we're doing with DTCC. So they use Xceptor as a sort of the data capture and transformation engine for SFTR reporting. And we know that, 40% of the data that we will end up passing into to be reported actually has to be calculated or derived from other sources because it's not available at source. So, data is a big issue underlying and impacting transformation. I suppose you can talk about what some of the black holes are. You mentioned AI quite a lot. We put a lot of effort into AI. Interesting, we tackled it as a technology initiative to begin with, i.e. creating that technical capability. What we're actually doing now is turning around and spending a lot more time with clients understanding the problems to solve for. So understanding, deep, what are you actually trying to achieve, so that we can then define and work with our clients actually how do we deploy that technology, but also how can we develop it further. So understanding those processes, understanding the challenges to us actually is critical in developing forward. And actually, if you look at one of the comments there, lack of explainability of AI solutions, I think it's difficult for people to grasp unless it's put into real life situations. So I think that's really important. Perhaps things around, not necessarily missed, but there's a couple of things that I would say are more prominent on our discussions with clients. And one which is becoming a greater demand. So one is around no code, and I think for us, that's key. That's one of the fundamentals of Xceptor. But if you look at the challenge around scalability, so how do you hyperscale out automation? How do you enable a large number of your staff to be able to automate those processes they typically undertake manually or through spreadsheets, etc. Then enabling through that no code, developing applications to do that quickly is key. I suppose the other one, which is probably very early in its infancy in deliberation, is around process mining. So I don't know whether that sort of features in your some of the research you've been doing, but we're seeing, and I think Ben will undoubtedly mention it, because and it's something that's part of the dialogue we're having, which actually is how can you understand what you have a lot quicker than doing a lot of manual investigation and undertaking all of that analytics around what you're doing. So I think those are the two things I would say are probably coming on the radar much more.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Andrew. I think those were really helpful. I think I completely agree that for one, we've been talking about this concept of the technical debt that most of our organizations have created over the last decade or so. But at the same time, there's a lot of process debt as well. We've been doing the same old processes and activities, and while we've been investing in tweaking these or automating these or making them more intelligent, we've still not done enough work in fundamentally changing the way that we do things. And I think some of the aspects that you mentioned around process mining, for example, low code, no code, will require us to change that mindset of not just looking at the technical debt, but also the process debt. But would love to get Ben, you involved in this conversation, and get a sense from you on what are you doing at Citibank to get the most out of these technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. So well, actually picking up from a few of those points, just before I start talking about the content on this slide, then the question that always resonates with me is what is the purpose of the technology that we're talking about? So back to one of your previous points around then, something that I found when I first came into this space is that we're presented with all these different types of technologies, which at the time are technologies looking for a solution almost, right? So you need to take a step back and look at, well, what is it I'm trying to achieve here? So irrespective of whether I have good data or not, whether I have the right talent, the right equipment, the right technologies in place. You know, a lot of that to me has to be framed by what is our ultimate objective, whether it's from a client experience perspective, whether it's from an internal productivity perspective, you know, particularly at the moment with COVID, capacity creation, controls around, you know, remote workforces, those sorts of things. So I think it's a very difficult challenge to start to frame how you actually want to go about this journey sometimes, right? So I've always been very firmly of the view that my function is a change management function. Although I run what primarily a technology shop now in this space, at its core, it's process. It's understanding operational process. It's understanding where we have needs, where our clients have needs, and what we can do to solve for them from a process perspective, and then using a variety of levers to achieve that, and primarily technology for the purpose of this conversation, right? So just in terms of, you know, the slide up in front of us here, I was just going to take a couple of minutes to describe the journey that we've been through, and it really is a journey, because when I first started this in my part of Citi in capital markets operations and technology nearly 5 years ago now, we were really looking at change from a process improvement, lean Six Sigma perspective, which have been a lot of my background to date. And you know, the challenge that we have in that scenario is that in an organization such as mine, with 4,000 people in 70 plus countries around the world, there's only so much you can be effective with by doing you know, relatively targeted process re-engineering projects, no matter how effective they are in their individual location or silo. So we started looking at RPA, because that was a time that, you know, there was a lot of hype around, you know, the initial rules-based RPA programs. We did a few proof of concepts on that, and then again with going through this thought process of what's my ultimate objective, how can I resolve the end-to-end process for a particular purpose. I started to look out for other technologies which could layer on top of pure rules-based RPA, and could scale and could give us more end-to-end automation. So I think of it as a kind of layer cake, hence why I've labeled some of these things in layers. So you know, the rules-based RPA products gave us fairly isolated good benefits in you know, fairly discrete scenarios for certain parts of an end-to-end process. But of course, if my objective is to re-engineer the whole process, or to, you know, create capacity from a human capital perspective or whatever else, then automating, you know, 5% of somebody's role doesn't really help. So we started looking at digitization tools with the point in mind around data management, not in terms of infrastructure and data management, more in the case of how can we organize it better, bearing in mind that we can't cleanse it and create a data lake overnight. And so, and off the back of that, really we started thinking through, well, if I have to consume data from multiple different sources in multiple different formats and multiple different, you know, structures, then I need to start looking at things, you know, technologies that will help me do that, which led us on to NLP. And then from there we sort of developed into on the RPA side, looking more around how can we scale the RPA bots to be more useful across multiple domains, which is where we started looking at in 2018-19 the power user concept of you know, teaching the organization to be able to create some of these solutions themselves, which is where we started to work with Andrew and Xceptor a lot as well, to layer Xceptor, you know, around some of the RPA and other automation work that we were doing, to be able to manage data into the workflow better, and to, you know, take actions off the back of that data. So we started taking a more sort of data-led view of life, not through a plan, but because that was what the requirement was effectively, right? But the whole power user concept to us is very powerful, because it actually drives change from within the organization rather than a group like mine implementing it central, you know, top down. And then, you know, really we had to take a pause and think, well, we've got some really great experience and some benefits from the journey so far, but actually my organization will always be siloed. We will always have multiple platforms performing versions of the same process around the world. How can we overlay that with a single process standard and a single automation standard, which is where we started looking into machine learning and some of those disciplines. And we thought that the most effective way to be able to do automation at scale for us was a few different things. So one was to create a capability to be able to consume, classify, structure data. So therefore we had a cleansed, normalized data set in simple terms. Right? The next was then, how do we then create a single common business process so that we can manage that data through a life cycle without having to customize it for every single different scenario that we go to, which is where we started building machine learning platforms. And then the next challenge is, how do we then make those platforms scalable, enable them to learn for themselves and to prevent the need for people to have to spend months training engines, which is where we get this great combination of things like NLP, things like a bunch of functionalities Xceptor gives us, a bunch of machine learning and AI type work, which actually gives us that integrated combination of the ability to consume data, the ability to route data and understand it, the ability to create a standard business process which is scalable, and then ultimately, of course, to resolve the processing issue, which was exactly where we were coming from 3 or 4 years prior to that. The question then was, we've kind of reached the limits of our capabilities, quite frankly, in terms of talent. So, but there's still more that we need to do. So we set up a lab within the lab. So Citi has a network of innovation labs around the world, and I have a group within one of those labs to look at what became things like virtual assistants, semantics, AI and deep learning disciplines, so that we truly had scale. And what I'll come on to talk about in a sec is how we actually then use that for various different purposes internally. And finally, just in terms to try and build that fully integrated toolkit, we started to move away or build the competency in-house ourselves to have our own in-house platforms to give us that true flexibility that we needed of that full integrated automation. So we still use, a number of the very good, vendor product, but we also felt that we needed the capability to be able to do elements of it ourselves, so that we can actually build the piece of the jigsaw together rather than having separate siloed implementations. Then down at the bottom of the slide, really back to my point around the purpose and the direction. Everything I've described so far is really a technology story, and learning how to, what technologies to use and to give us that kind of end-to-end view of process improvement, if you like. But it comes back to the question of purpose, right? So, and the purpose for us is to be able to deliver effectively, to be able to deliver fast, and to be able to deliver for actually multiple purposes. So primarily to drive the client experience, to build more STP, to build better handling into our client experience, but also to get a better understanding of our internal environment and to create productivity. And again, capacity is a very big theme at the moment. So one of the key things we did was to make sure that the organization that we run is owned by O&T, so that we don't have any of those traditional fights between ops and tech. I own the tech, so I also own the problem if I don't deliver, right? But we also wanted to look at how we use those tools and the best way to manage them. So we built out big data environments, analytical capabilities. We were starting to look more into process mining, as Andrew mentioned as well. Ultimately for the purpose of driving client experience. So the final thing we're kind of layering into that, and then finally back to Saurabh's point around talent as well, is that we we can't achieve any of this without the right skills and the right talent in the organization, driven to a single purpose. So we've developed client experience scorecards to keep our efforts very focused. We've developed data models so that we know categorically where the areas are that we should be looking into make improvements. And in terms of talent, we're creating workforce of the future programs so that we can resolve for the challenge that operations people don't really understand technology to a great extent, and the reverse. So in the programs that we're creating, we're effectively equipping people to operations people to get a better understanding of the client and the operation environment and the technology so that they can actually really purpose them and drive them themselves. So if we flip onto the next slide, Sarah, then really just quickly on this one, what we've created is truly an ecosystem, which was always the intent. And it comes back to the AAA trifecta concept. Right? Everything is data driven. For us, I start at the point of data. So in the top circle, everything to me is around putting processes in place to measure where we're good, where we need to improve, what people like, what people don't like, where we spend our time, learning lessons from different parts of the organization. So everything based on analytics will then direct our efforts. Then, in the bottom right circle, the analytics that we run off the back of that is very targeted, because now we know which part of the organization to go and help. Then we run modeling to look at best practice and those types of things, and that's where we're starting to look at things like process mining, which will then give us a very, very data-led view of the baseline of what we're trying to improve. And then, of course, we then have a view of what we need to automate. And then the question is, what solutions do we need to automate for? And then we go back to the previous concept of, we now have this series of RPA, NLP, machine learning solutions, which can really help to then drive change. And of course, the whole thing is truly a self-feeding mechanism, because we make changes in the tools create data, the data creates more information, we can run more analytics, and we can keep on improving. So it's a very integrated story, and it all comes back to the fact that we are here to change the organization, not to implement technology. So it's been very business led, which actually, coming on to Andrew, and I'll hand over to Andrew in a sec, right? That's one of the things that's worked really well with our relationship with Xceptor, because philosophically we're very aligned, because a no-code solution, and particularly the way that Xceptor themselves work, is very much aligned to helping the business help themselves. Right? And from there, everything else ultimately is common sense, if not very easy. Right? So with that, I'm going to hand over to Andrew, who's going to talk a little bit more.
Thanks, Ben. So perhaps just start just by a very quick overview of the Acceptor platform. So it's a single enterprise platform. We take the view that it's all about data, and therefore, if you can, through no code, through rules, or utilizing some of the sort of NLP, ML type models, if you take actions on the data, then that drives transformation, and that also drives automation as far as possible. And we're realistic that you can't automate everything, because sometimes legally you have to have some degree of human intervention. So if you look at the sort of the key capabilities of the platform, they fall into sort of three main segments. So one is around the ability to consume and transform data. So capturing any data, any format, any source, taking it through that ingestion, extraction, validation, repair, enrichment. Then some form of processing of that data. So it's digitizing that process, automating it as much as possible. Could be exception handling if something's happened that can't be automated, repair. We do a lot of documentation, creation and processing. If you have to reconcile in banking financial services, quite often you have to reconcile. So there's that and some form of workflow if required. And as I say, we utilize the capability set of Xceptor as far as possible to automate and minimize any human interaction. And then you have distribution, which actually is doing something with the data, whether it's pushing it into a platform, creating documents, contracts, passing it internally through APIs or direct distribution to other platforms, etc. So those are sort of three the main components of the Acceptor platform. As you can see, you can deploy the components to simplify, to automate relatively simple processes up to more complex processes, all on the single platform. And that's really key for us, because where we're seeing, and we've seen with a number of our clients, which is where they're rationalizing their technology stack as part of the efficiency, and to Ben's point, actually bringing in 1, 2, 3, or a very small number of technologies to work in an ecosystem to deliver that real automation and transformation journey. And therefore, we were very clear that not only did it have to be no code, but it also had to have the breadth of capability. So if I just touch quickly on Citi, then just to position our relationship with Citi, as Ben mentioned, Acceptor Platform has been adopted across Citi markets as an automation, a digitization platform. We have the same relationship with Citi Security Services, so globally they use our platform for the same purposes, and Citi TTS, Treasury and Trade Solutions. So we've got a strong relationship with Citi, and perhaps I'll just talk briefly about one particular area in each of those units. So if you take markets, interestingly, our relationship with markets started as an EUD, spreadsheet replacement program. So there was some quite complex processes that were actually being dealt with through spreadsheets. It's not an uncommon problem that we're brought in to solve, which is, we undertake some complex regulation or complex process transactions through spreadsheets or a series and combination of spreadsheets, and so we'll go in and we'll map out the process, understand that with our clients, and then automate that through configuring it to the platform. So we take one example in Ben's area, which is segregated election process. So I'd say this was kind of like medium complexity. So that was capturing information from 4 source systems, carrying out some calculations and generating an election notice that was sent out to all clients. And that, as I say, that was done by a number of operators with a series of spreadsheets and some manual interventions. So that was automated end to end. In security services, we've got a strong footprint. I can see the names of some of my clients on this webinar. So we work with all the leading banks in their across their security services organizations. One of the common use cases, which is what we also do for Citi, is around the capture of trades. It's a relatively simple process. The trades will come in on spreadsheets, on PDFs, emails, faxes. We'll capture those trades, validate them against a book of record, and deal with creating the necessary data representation and pushing those into the various systems, whether custody or fund platforms. That's a relatively simple use case, and probably one which is sort of probably semi-complex in TTS that we've been working on recently is around purpose of payment. So this is a new requirement for all payments in certain countries, where you have to add the purpose, otherwise the payment gets rejected. Of course, the enterprise platforms weren't able to be changed at the time to include, or now to include, that purpose of payment. So there was a sort of subsidiary process put in place where the payment was passed to Xceptor. We then went out to the client, captured the purpose of payment, brought that in, validated it through various rules, and then included it in the message, and then passed it on to make the payment complete. So you can see the other part of that is there's 3 parts of the bank. We work across all of the banking, financial services, and insurance space, and and the platform itself could be used in multiple industries. And that's key for us in terms of allowing the platform to be scaled across enterprises and drive that digital transformation without the need to bring in many other technologies that are aligned to that. So I think gives a sense, hopefully that was useful in terms of bringing some things to life for the audience.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Andrew. I think that was very helpful, and I think something that Ben also mentioned, that he doesn't run a technology shop but a change management shop. I think that also resonates with me quite a lot. And this, I think, from a Xceptor perspective, and we sort of evaluated and assessed you, and sort of asked you to be the HFS hot vendor, and largely because you've been able to unleash the power of data, because and go beyond just the hype of AI and ML and low code, no code, but really stuck to your roots on unleashing the data.
So perhaps I'll interrupt, because I've just seen your slide describe one success story, and there was one. Perhaps I'll just carry on rambling on for another couple of minutes, maybe on a success story. Sorry about this, Ben, but it's actually quite. And this isn't Citi. This is another one of our clients, and this sort of goes to that whole. You talked about talent, you talked about knowledge, you talked about scaling out, and interesting. This is one example which I think is really, really important around change, but actually bringing the business with you and actually bringing tech and ops together. And we started with this major business unit of a tier 1 bank. We started with a single application of Xceptor, and which is not untypical. We then started to work in adjacent units around delivering further automation and transformation, and what we ended up doing was then actually agreeing a global arrangement with this major business unit as part of one of their 3 technologies to drive digital transformation across this business unit. And it's interesting, and I heard the term this morning with a partner around, which was hyper automation. And this is a great example because over the period of the relationship, we've now enabled some 3,000 people globally in this unit to be able to use Xceptor. And that's actually tested us, because you can't train them face to face. We've had to move a lot of our business digital to be able to scale it out. So in terms of learning, in terms of how we engage with them, around how we drive product development to support them in their use. We're running boot camps across the globe, etc., etc. And they've got something in the region of 900 processes on Xceptor. Probably the majority are if you think back to the previous slide, the majority are at that simple or mid-level, but they actually have now got, and we're working with them on the really complex things around really transforming what they do around account opening in their custody space, what they're doing around complex cross-border tax reclaim, what they're doing around repapering for all of their legal documentation, such as LIBOR and the various other, when Brexit was a requirement. So we're taking some quite complex processes now and really driving that transformation. But I think it's the scaling part of it, the hyper automation in my mind, which actually has really been a really good lesson. And one that we're now, working with our other clients to actually take that model and say, well, look, this is a great example of how you can really scale out that automation and transformation journey.
Yeah, no, Andrew, that's a really good example of scaling up, which we all know is the biggest challenge right now. Before I wanted to ask you a couple of questions on this page, but I think there are lots of questions from our audience, and I wanted to pick a few of them before I ask you my questions. And this one is for, I think, Ben. Ben, the question is, once you've deployed the technology model that you discussed, how do you ensure things are not breaking, when you perform system upgrade changes, patches, etc.?
With difficulty, The first thing we did, which slowed us down actually in our original adoption, was to create a shared technology environment. So that's where we do all the licensing, all the infrastructure hosting, all the change management around the environment. So any changes on the products themselves, upgrades, enhancements, etc., all go through that centralized change management function. And even with our power user concept, we enable people to effectively create their own automations. But then at the point of going into production, we take them back into that centralized environment to maintain integrity around them. The bigger issue, of course, is how do you monitor for changes in the environment for systems, feeding into those automation platforms. So, I don't think I haven't met anybody with the perfect answer to that. In our case, we have a very tight integration with the change management process. So effectively, we kind of run a manual scan across changes during production and reconcile those back against our bot inventory, basically, to try and pick things up. Beyond that, of course, we have strong infrastructure monitoring and the usual kind of level 1, 2, 3 support structure to get onto problems quickly. And generally, of course, we find that particularly when it comes to basic RPA, then the problems are actually relatively easily fixed. The issue is trying to find what caused the issue in the first place, which we try and minimize with everything I described, but it's by far from a perfect science.
Got it. So look, I've got to ask both of you this question of because you, Ben, as an enterprise client of these services, and you, Andrew, as a provider of technology solution, what are you guys seeing as the impact of COVID-19 on adoption? And maybe we'll start with you, Ben, then go to Andrew.
Sure. We have the short-term challenge, hopefully short-term challenges of practical things of lack of availability of people. In our operational environment, particularly in our capital markets world, volumes were spiking. We had issues, of course, with people learning to work from home and all those sorts of things. So actually, just engaging with people to get them to help with testing, requirement specification, those sorts of things has been difficult over the period, or getting easier. I think the other main challenge is you referenced it earlier, but budgets are going to get considerably squeezed as economies contract, that sort of thing. So that's going to give us a challenge. But with that kind of war spirit mentality, it is going to lead to, I think, an absolute catalyst for significant acceleration. We're going to have to do more with less, and it's also going to change the focus, certainly for us, of where we've been putting our automation. So the business cases that we're working on at the moment are very much more around capacity creation rather than productivity, if you like. Which in itself is much more motivating for staff because they feel less defensive and less threatened by the fact that it's more an assistant role, if you like, rather than the Grim Reaper coming to take away roles, right?
Yeah, I think that's very interesting that you talk about capacity creation versus productivity. I think that's where this is headed.
I think so. I think the other key thing is around dynamic management of the workforce. So things like machine learning platforms and overlaying of work routing capabilities and process mining, some of those sorts of things, I think, give us the opportunity to, the new working reality is going to be for some time to come that, particularly in our case, we're going to have people working from home. People are not going to be physically sitting next to each other anymore for a long time. So how do we maintain controls, consistency, standard business process, great client experience? And to me, the answer is these technologies, because they can sit on top of underlying product processes and actually flow the work and manage the work in a much more consistent way.
Great. Andrew, what are you seeing from your vantage point?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, the resiliency of operations has been tested, and in some instances, found challenging. And as Ben has mentioned, it's interesting. We're seeing some actually short-term boost of initiatives, and that's primarily driven by existing operations not being able to deal with sort of increased volumes for specific events. And so, for one example is, we've been asked to help a client automate the process to deal with applications for mortgage relief payments. And why is this? Interestingly, this process has been around, right, for a while, but it's never had the kind of volumes coming through it because it's business as usual. It didn't actually feature high on the automation list, but of course, because of COVID-19, the volumes are spiking. They can't deal with them manually or through the spreadsheets they're acting. So it's now actually popped up as a priority area for automation. So we've been, we work, and we've had this sort of couple of areas with our clients where we've been working with them to quickly sort of automate something that wasn't previously on the radar. And interestingly, I get asked by my board, what do you see as the future coming through? And we're not seeing anything being derailed, despite the sort of the potential, impact on financial performance of our clients, the economic situation. And I did actually ask one of our key clients about a major initiative we're talking to them about, and they said, well, look, we're as keen to progress now as we were before, and actually we see this actually as a solution for the longer term, right? We need to drive, transform, and automate this part of our operations because we can't let another future event impact us the way that it has done this time. So for sure we see that there will be an increase in demand as our clients recalibrate their priorities, look at experiences of COVID-19 and how to make sure they don't actually, they can ride out another event. As Ben says, create the capacity. That was always one of the things, but I think that's going to continue. And it's interesting, I don't know if anyone picked up yesterday's announcement by Deutsche Bank about them sort of recommencing their downsizing, but also pushing forward with their whole sort of digital transformation initiative. And I quote from the CEO was, digitization is the new currency. So I thought it was quite an interesting one. So they definitely see it, accelerated by COVID through, but something that they were on that journey because they had to for the long-term sustainability of their business.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we've been talking to a number of our enterprise clients as well, Andrew, and I think a number of these digital transformation initiatives were tottering at the edges, and a lot of them were being given lip service to, but I think there's no burning platform like today to convert that intent into reality. So look, we've got 25, 26 different questions, and we've got 6 minutes. So let's try and address some of the audience questions. So Ben, this is a question where they're asking, so when driving projects in Citi, what kind of challenges do you see at the start of this journey around conflicting requirements of different groups wanting different sets of data being represented differently?
Yeah, we forged through it. So effectively, again, a bit like some of the other comments, there's no right answer to that to some extent. So what we've always done is to have a very kind of open model. So the models that we create and the systems that we create are intended to be the foundation of people, of systems which can then be used in multiple different ways by multiple different people for their own purpose. So we've intentionally designed our platforms so that although we might design them for a particular purpose in the first place, they are very generic. So when we talk about things like document digitization, for example, many tools that I come across on the market focus on specific types of documents or products or whatever else it might be. Our digitization platforms just digitize documents. It doesn't matter what they are. So so then people are free to then go and use them for their own use cases. So the short answer to this particular question is, we take in the data, we normalize it, we put it into the automation of a particular use case with a business outcome in its initial form, and we then effectively create UIs or other business stubs of business processes so that other groups can either modify it themselves for their own output, or else they can ask us to do it from a centralized perspective.
Yeah, Thanks, Ben. So, uh, so Andrew, this is probably best you try and answer this. And the question is, given the quote that Saurabh started with, you remember the profanity-laced quote that I started with, the ton of data, and then Ben's explanation of the journey that Citi went through, given the data swamps that exist. In your opinion, how much time does it take to get the right data in place, before you can actually use it to make decisions? So it's a
Um,
time question. And
yeah, I mean, without talking about specific time, but I would say when we work with our clients and when we're undertaking, we're looking to sort of automate processes, I would say probably the largest component of that engagement is around what I'll call the data architecture. So actually, what data do we need to automate the process, and where can we actually source that data from? And it's a case of where can we go and get it from, and quite often we can't go and get it because it's not available, or it's actually in two sources, and those two sources within the organization, the data is conflicting. So we quite often, as part of automating the process, have a whole data layer which actually is sourcing the data that we need, and quite often having to transform the reference data so that we get the most accurate picture to be able to automate that process. And that may mean, it's transient data, so we'll do it when we need it. It may be that actually we act as a data store because that's the only place that we can hold it, and it's the only place that's available. And quite often it can mean getting data from external to that from that organization. So it is quite a complex question to answer, but the answer is, we don't rely on nice, clean data, golden sources of data, because they don't exist. And it's part of what we do, which actually is to create the representation of data that allows us to complete the process and automate it.
great. So we are probably just 1 minute away, but would love to I always like to ask this question, given that we live in such an imperfect world. If there was one wish that would come true, and not a personal wish, guys, but something related to the topic, what would that be? And maybe Ben, you start with that.
I was going to wish for my receding hairline back, but I wish that this was easy, and that there was some kind of rule book which told you which tools to use for which purpose, and which ones are going to work and which ones aren't. So it's not, but at the same time, what I've actually loved about the journey that I've been on, professionally over the last few years, is the fact that because there are no easy answers to it, you have to spend a lot of time with smart people with smart ideas, and figure it out and build some great relationships. So I think it's yes, part of that wish has come true in a sense, but actually it would be nice if it was all kind of written down for us.
Yeah, and like Ben, I don't have a receding hairline, but I wish I could have a haircut. I'll tell you that. But on the professional front, it was interesting. We talked about COVID-19. And we talked about it being a catalyst, a trigger for greater propensity and greater drive behind automation and digitization. I think the risk is that it's also seen as an excuse, and I've probably heard as many excuses as I have triggers around catalysts for change. So my wish come true is around ambition, be bold around that scale of automation, and not to use COVID-19 as an excuse to hold back and move forward.
Yeah, and on that ambitious note, I think we've got to end this. Thank you so much, Ben and Andrew, for sharing your insights and your experiences. I think for everyone who's been asking, will we get this tech? The answer is yes. We will be posting it on our website in a couple of days. There'll be a recording of this as well. And I know there are 30 different questions, Ben and Andrew, and we probably were able to answer 5 or 6. So we will get back in an offline way to all the questions and respond to as many questions as we can. But thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe and stay confined. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.